Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, it's not a big jump from the page to the screen and ultimately into our hearts. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with, once more, as always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and in a conversational fashion. And you know what? If you like how we do things around here, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you do because, well, quite frankly, you're listening right now. You can subscribe to the podcast. Please do so. Hit that subscribe button. Give us that old 5-star rating. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can find us over at Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, pretty much anywhere, any provider you need, we're there. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel, so if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would absolutely appreciate it. Don't hesitate also to follow us on social media. We're on the Facebook, the Twitter, and the Instagram, as the kids call it, at, where else? We're at In the Seats, for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large. Because if we love to watch it and write about it and talk about it, we love it when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please pay us a visit. Oh boy, on this episode, boys and girls, we got a good one because, let's just say we're talking about The Bad Guys, which is now available on video on demand and 4K and Blu-ray and DVD. Basically, whatever format you like to be able to watch it at home as many times as you like. It is an animated romp. It's basically an animated heist movie. I mean, it's almost imagine Ocean's 11, but with animals, animated animals instead of George Clooney and Brad Pitt. This movie is a hell of a lot of fun, and it plays for such a wide swath of audiences from 8 to 80. I know that's a cliche, but it's actually true on this one. And we had the unique pleasure of sitting down with the author of the books that this film is based on. He was also executive producer, and a co-writer on the screenplay, I do believe. But his name is Mr. Aaron Blabey. Did I pronounce that right? Blabey. I may have pronounced that wrong. If I did, I apologize in advance. But like I said, he did these as a series of animated books, and I mean, they're still doing them, really. But it's a lot of fun characters, and it's a lot of fun, and we had a chance to talk with Aaron about his insight on these characters and sort of how this all came about, which was basically born out of a failed acting career, as he'll say in our conversation that you're about to hear. But he was a really interesting guy, and it's just getting to find out about the development of an animated feature like this is always fascinating to listen to, because I mean, these things really do take an army to make, but they're still these very creative and sort of engaging endeavors on so many levels. And I think that's a good way to sum up The Bad Guys as a movie as well, because it's again, it's a lot of fun. It will play well for the kids, but it's very engaging for the adults as well. And as I said before, it is available on video on demand, or on Ultra HD 4K Blu-ray, or on regular Blu-ray, or on DVD from all major providers, so you can watch it how you like and enjoy it as many times as you want at home, because it is in stores now. But first, please enjoy our talk with Aaron, because between you and me, it's a pretty good one. Just congratulations on not just the film, but I mean, the series in general. I mean, I really got a kick out of it because I didn't know anything about it before. I mean, it's basically a heist movie, but is, as like heist, criminals, but in sort of cartoon form. I'm kind of curious, what was sort of the initial inspiration for you initially when you were writing the books?
I've told this story a lot, but it's true. I had my two kids, and my youngest was hating reading, finding it, and he was the books he was bringing home from school, he was finding so boring that they would literally make him cry. And I thought I want to come up with something cool, and I was thinking about stuff that I loved when I was his age, and he was into scary animals at the time, as kids that age often are. And I thought, well, what did I love at that age? And then I don't know why, but the idea occurred to me, well, hang on, what do I love now? And I was thinking about all the genres that aren't made for kids. And I thought, well, is there a way to kind of hotwire that and do it for kids? And then I'll never know why, but I'd been thinking about doing something about prejudice, which didn't sound like a lot of fun. And then I was thinking about the scary animals that he was into, and the two things clicked together about scary animals being judged because of the way they looked. And then that just somehow got dressed up in Tarantino black suits, and then bam, there they were. And it sort of, and then once that happened, a door opened and there was this vehicle I suddenly had for all the kind of genre stuff that I love and have always been obsessive about. I suddenly had a way to take all of that, all that iconography, even scary movies, like take things from all over the place and then funnel it into material that is kid friendly, but in such a way that is kind of exciting for kids, because they suddenly have iconography that they're normally not allowed to get their hands on, but is actually made specifically for them. And that all sounds very, calculated, but it sort of happened very naturally, and it all from the impulse of wanting to make my kids, who were 6 and 8 at the time, laugh, and I knew the stuff that they wish they could get their hands on but weren't allowed to watch yet. And I remember that feeling vividly from when I was a kid. I remember badgering my parents to let me watch Mad Max 2. I remember the day I got my hands on that VHS tape and put it in, I was like, oh, wow. So it's that. It was trying to harness that feeling for kids.
Well, I think you did that and then some, man. Because it is so much fun. But I'm kind of curious because I was doing my research, and you had a pretty good run as an actor before you sort of started making the transition into sort of writing and doing children's books. Like, what sort of sparked this transition?
I was a terrible actor. That's what sparked the transition. I was rubbish. I was absolutely rubbish. And I did it for about 10 years. And look, I did it because I loved movies and I wanted to be involved somehow. But I just, as a teenager, just picked the wrong gig. I just picked the wrong side of the camera. I never felt comfortable doing it. And I was always kind of outside of myself. I wasn't inside it the way a good actor needs to be, and there's nothing more painful when somebody loves movies as much as I do, which means that you adore the work of great actors as much as I do. Any footage of myself acting now is just mortifying. I'm in the fetal position on the floor, but the impulse was right, which was movies and stories, and I just had to move to the other side. And then as soon as I did, everything made sense, and it suddenly was very freeing. So the transition was a very natural one. It's astonishing to me. It took me so long to realize, the fact that I kept plugging away. But I was younger too, and I think it took actually having kids for me to actually step around and just shift a few degrees to the left and go, oh, hang on a minute, what if I did that? And then it suddenly fell into place.
So, for you in writing these books and telling these stories, was the hope always to get something adapted for the big screen? Or was it just a question of trying to find a sort of another avenue of wanting to, tell stories?
Well, you know what? When I wrote The Bad Guys, to that point, none of my books had been successful. And then that year, The Bad Guys and another series I have called Pick the Pug, they both took off simultaneously. But at that point, it never crossed my mind that I would sell more than a couple of thousand copies of anything. So the idea of a movie adaptation seemed like science fiction at the time. But I think because of that, I'd reached a point where when I wrote The Bad Guys, because I'd had no commercial success to that point, it was sort of my last shot. I had 2 little kids. I was 40, and I thought, you know what, if this doesn't work, I'm probably just going to have to find something else to do. So there was a kind of devil may care attitude, and I just thought, I'm going to write exactly what I want to do here. I'm not going to think about, and by doing that, it inadvertently exploded. So the fact that it was ultimately turned into a movie, yes, in many ways it was constructed like a blueprint or a storyboard for a film. The whole series is, but it was almost coincidental. It was just somebody who loved movies going, well, I can't make the kind of movie, the kind of big budget movie that I have in my head all by myself, so I'm going to do it in a book form. And then ironically, that book was then picked up by a big studio who then turned it into a big movie. So of course, from my perspective, it's the most beautiful thing that's happened is what was actually happening in my head when I was creating the books, almost, independently, then just took off and then turned into precisely what I always dreamed but never dared to realistically imagine would occur. So that's been pretty spectacular.
No, I guess that dovetails into the next question, because I mean, you hear stories like on things like this when something gets adapted for the big screen. On one end, you can be a collaborator and be very involved with the entire process, or on the other end, it's here's a check, go away. Like when you first got that call, like were they sort of encouraging you to sort of be a collaborator on this, or was it something you had to sort of fight for?
Well, it's interesting that they were always wonderful, but I think the part of the reason was that because the books were so successful so quickly, most of the studios in Hollywood were interested. So it created a very different scenario. So I met with all the studios, DreamWorks among them, and it was pretty much a no-brainer from the get-go. DreamWorks felt like the place, but because it was a competitive scenario, it wasn't. And what was wonderful too, though, DreamWorks were very keen to preserve the tone of the books. They wanted to keep that alive. So when I came on as executive producer, it was very natural, and they were immediately very inclusive. I got lucky, though. It could have varied because these sort of horror stories happen all the time. A contract can be written as a producer, but at the end of the day, the final version of the movie is going to be what the studio wants it to be. So I was very, very lucky that I had a creative team that were enormously inclusive, enormously respectful, and reverent even of the source material. And then ultimately under Margie and Kristen, a studio that just went, we want this thing to, go as big as the books have and bigger, and so to be inside that, and that's the thing, you see train wreck adaptations all the time. You see just like authors just having their hearts broken, and I feel so lucky that I genuinely love the movie, and that's rare. It's really really rare, and each time you begin a new one of them, I have a number of things in production or development elsewhere, and that's always the fear, is that your thing is going to then go off the rails somehow during the process, because the process is very long and there's often a lot of cooks in the kitchen. It's hard to keep things moving in the right direction. But I think it's inadvertently been, I sort of had been training for it my whole life without knowing it, because I'm embarrassed to say how much thought I put into like seeing movies and absorbing movies. That's all I do, really. So because of that, I could speak the language, and because I'd been in the industry in a very strange way when I was younger as a performer, but I knew the machinations of it. So the combination of those two things, once it actually came to developing and producing my own stuff with a studio, I wasn't the sort of, naive author kind of just really happy to be involved. It wasn't that kind of scenario. I could talk pacing, structure, whatever. I could be inside the conversations and be coherent and hopefully helpful, because it's a problem solving a lot of the time with an animation of this size, like a jigsaw puzzle. There's you and it does it, and there were long periods where there were wonderful things, and then some parts that weren't working, and then collectively we all just knuckled down and created something that I think we're all really proud of.
Is that where the like, I guess maybe the moments of trust come? Because I mean, obviously it's your baby, you're going to be very possessive of it, but I mean, especially with animation, it takes such an army to make these things. Like for you, when were you able to sort of trust the process, I guess is maybe the right word?
It kind of creeps up on you, I guess. And look, but that said, because Damon and then ultimately Pierre, when he came on to direct, we're just clearly such big fans of the source material. And one of the major things was Ethan Cohen, who I had suggested as screenwriter really early up, and then thankfully he was on the top of DreamWorks list as well. So where there was this lovely bit of synchronicity there, because I'd been a huge fan of, among other things, Tropic Thunder. I just thought it was a very funny piece of writing, and I think it'd be so great for this. And as it turns out, Ethan's kids were huge fans of the books. So it was wonderful in the sense, because Ethan, on one hand, he didn't want to be the guy who messed up the bad guys for his children. He didn't want to be that guy. But it just, the trust levels were very high. The more dangerous times were when there were a couple of changeovers of regime at the studio. So it's always because you're writing out those, but the bad guys consistently survived that. And then as soon as Margie came in, it was just like, we're away, we're off to the races straight away, because she just, was so supportive immediately, Margie and Kristen Lowe. So yeah, look, and I'm have trust issues at the best of times, and I'm an absolute control freak creatively. So yes, it was a curve, but you have to be really, you can't hold on too tight as well. It's a really tricky balance, because
hold on tightly, let go lightly, right?
Yeah, that's right. And at the end of the day, if you're not directing it, it's somebody else's movie ultimately. So you can steer, you can guide, you can suggest. And thankfully, these guys were just beautiful all the way through, and they listened to everything. And I'm so proud of the fact that the movie is peppered with stuff that is directly from the books. There's like every few minutes, there's something that is a direct take from the book series, and then they've blended it really beautifully with a whole bunch of other stuff.
And I mean, I love how these characters in this film, this story even, it doesn't condescend to sort of the younger audiences. Like for you, and not just developing this one, but I mean, maybe about some of your other stuff as well. It feels like you're very much somebody who wants to sort of, I mean, you even said this, to sort of push that boundary a little bit and to sort of let kids into something a little different than what the mainstream kind of shows them.
I think it's about having a lack of fear about what kids can, understand and get and enjoy. And I think I'm an only child, and maybe as part of that, I grew up just around adults, and I think that sort of colored the way that I absorb information. And then I think as a kid, and the stuff that I loved, and I would see movies, like I said, I mentioned Mad Max, but even like Tootsie, I remember seeing that very young. My mum loved it, and it became one of my favorite movies when I was a child. And then accordingly, when we had kids and our boys were young, we've never spoken to our kids we've never spoken down, and I just always knew that they loved stuff that was sophisticated, and they would get it, and it's just trusting that kids will go along for the ride with that. And it's sort of, I think a lot of entertainment for kids plays very low and very young, and doesn't trust that they'll get stuff. And I don't know. It's something that like ultimately, when it comes to creating things, you have to just do stuff that makes you happy and excited when you're doing it. And because I had this wonderful little focus group in my house of these two kids whose sense of humors I knew really well and really respected and loved, I would write a sort of pitch to them. And if I got a laugh from them, then I knew it was, I was onto something. So that has been quite the feat to then preserve that and let that transfer into something, like you said, that's been made by an army. But it's a pretty good army. There's a lot of very, very talented people who work at DreamWorks. So it was, it's been best case scenario as far as I'm concerned. I feel like very, very lucky author.
No, I mean, I'm curious just to start putting a bow on this, because I mean, I love how you mentioned at the beginning, just referencing Mad Max and having that sort of hurrah VHS moment, but it kind of feels like in the media landscape today that we've lost that a little bit, and especially the younger viewers coming up won't necessarily be able to have those moments. I'm kind of curious for you as a content creator, as a developer, because I mean, obviously there's this film, you've got other stuff in the works. How do you try to do stuff that will engage a little bit more than what's expected in sort of the traditional pop culture milieu?
Look, it's the whole high wire act as far as I'm concerned, and I deal with it every day in my studio, because I work entirely in isolation. So like COVID varied my lifestyle in no way whatsoever. I'm just in my studio every day alone doing this stuff, and you know, I have moments where I genuinely feel, I have days where I go, man, you've lost your mind. What are you writing here? This is insane, you know. And I have a monster in the second half of the book series. He's got chainsaws for hands and all that kind of stuff. And and it's that thing of plucking iconography and going, okay, well, that's way too full on for kids. Okay, well, what could I do with it that would then put a spin on it that makes it work and makes it just funny instead? And then just constantly trying to find ways around it so that, and that is a really fun game to play. And it's, yes, you're always trying to find out where the line is. And it's funny, I have a formula on my wall that I've written up, and it's ridiculously simple, but it actually does work. It's just smart/dumb, and then funny/scary. And it's finding the balance between those things and just seeing how far you can push in each of those directions before you go too far in any of the directions and it's suddenly not for kids anymore. Because if something is too sophisticated, then, you know, they're going to get bored because they're not going to get the references. If it's too stupid, then it's, you know, it's just like, meh, whatever. If it's too scary, they're not going to want to read it and it's going to give them nightmares. And then the funny element kind of binds it all together, I suppose. So it's trying to strike that. And what I have in my head, and it's also on the walls of my studio, the walls of my studio are like the inside of my brain. I've put every image that I've ever found interesting in a movie around me. Is just this sort of cauldron of unconnected images that I kind of draw upon for whatever story I'm telling. I go, well, how can I take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and mix it together in such a way? Because there's that thing that there's no new ideas, but there are new contexts, and you can take something, put it somewhere new, and suddenly it feels incredibly fresh because it's never been played quite that way before or played for that audience before. And I think that's why I'm feeling, like I said, I feel crazy some days, and some days I feel like a pioneer, because I feel like by taking stuff that isn't for kids, messing with it and making it directly for kids, can put you in situations creatively where you go, I don't know if anyone's ever done anything quite like this before. And it's really cool. You know, again, you feel certifiable some days, but it's pretty exciting too, because you can sort of create something that is very much your own space, which I feel very, very excited to be working in each day. And the Bad Guys series will be finished at episode 20. I've just written 17 and 18, and next year I'll write 19 and 20. And I really don't know how I'm going to feel when it's done, because I've been looking for them my whole life. This kind of vehicle I'd been actively searching for forever and ever. And then the fact that they just sort of fell out of my brain one day and has allowed me to spend a decade doing this. And they're somewhat irreplaceable. But at the same time, I feel really strongly that I want the book series to be like, just get better. Every single installment till an enormous big finish, and then just mic drop and walk away. That's really what I've wanted to do, and I think I'm hoping, touch wood, that will be the case. So yeah, and then I'll think of something else. But yeah, it's a pretty cool job.
Well, I think you do have a pretty cool job, and I mean, I can't wait to see what's next. I mean, especially from a cinematic standpoint, there's a perverse part of me that wants to see these characters in some sort of George Miller-esque type world. Just pulling from some of the obvious inspirations that you've had, it could be a hell of a lot of fun. But You know what, man? Just keep doing the good work, and thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you. Have a great one. See you, man.
Nice to meet you. All right, nice to meet you, Aaron.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.